Today, we're going to talk about products and markets. And we're going to have a really interesting guest interview with Jason Copeland in the second half. So let's get into it. When you're thinking about markets and users and what product you're going to build, I'd say there are a dozen essential questions. What is the full set of functions and services for the product? That is, what is the product? Because it's usually not just it's a piece of code. It's a piece of code and a website and documentation and some back-end services, or it's a box that you plug into the wall, but there's also instructions and there's a support organization. And you have to think about what the whole product is. You need to know who is going to purchase it. That is, who's making the decision to buy. And that's distinct from question number 4, which is who is going to use it? Because you sell toys to parents, but they're not the user. It has to appeal to them in one way, and it has to appeal to the child in a different way. Who's going to sell it? Are you going to put up a website and expect people to find it? Is it going in the App Store? Are you going to have distributors who sell it? Does it go into Costco and people take it off the shelf? What's the channel? We talked about who's going to use it. What are the other products and services that are used around it? Things that are not part of your product, but are an essential element or a common element in the use of the product. It's pretty obvious, for example, on an app in the App Store, you're going to use it with your iPhone. It is also the case that if you buy a garage door opener, you're going to use it with your car, and so on. But think about that ecosystem that has to surround it to make it fully useful or fully satisfying. You also need to know, for the problem you're trying to solve, what are the other ways it may be solved? In some cases, it could be by a directly competing product, or it could be by some other method of getting something done. Who are the competitors? What are the things that you're directly selling against, that when somebody is going to purchase it, they would be considering this other thing? Who offers the complementary products and services? What are those things that are used with it? And what are their motives? And what is their roadmap? And what are the problem they're trying to solve? Because that will tell you a lot about how your product needs to be initially defined and how it's likely to evolve over time. But how, and change is an important thing, particularly because startups take root best where there is a disruption, where there is something changing, where there is some reason outside of your existence about why users are likely to change for some reason. And understanding how that user's conditions, attitude, constraints, opportunities look may be very important. I think it's then important to look a little deeper. What is the underlying technology and how is that likely to change? That's very important right now in things like human-computer interfaces, where the advent of conversational AI is making a significant difference in what your potential is. Similarly, Moore's Law has played a big role historically in changing how you might approach different kinds of silicon-based opportunities. In what forms and how much are the customers willing to pay? It goes back to fundamental questions about who's going to purchase it and what is the function and value that the product is providing. And by understanding something about how they may be able to pay, you both constrain what you attempt to what's plausible and feasible, but you also get to open up new windows into the marketplace, because you may be able to change in a significant way how you engage with customers, because you're creating new business models that previously they had to buy a big piece of capital equipment, and now you're renting it to them by the minute, like AWS. Or they used to buy it by the minute, but now they're able to use it themselves, the move from taxi cabs to rental cars. And by creating new ways that people may be able to buy, you create new opportunities. And finally, and as almost more of an underlying assessment of where your product can go from here, what's the longer term impact? How could the widespread use of this product affect the economy, society, the environment? These are things you want to take into account, not just as a piece of responsibility about your product, but in understanding what constraints and what tailwinds you might face going forward. So these 12 questions, I think, are ones that you ought to be able to answer at some point as you develop your idea. And certainly you should be thinking about from quite early on. So let's talk a bit about how you find something that people genuinely want and can't already get. Let's look at the big picture here, because there are, I think, some conceptual tools that you want to use to figure out where you are in the ecosystem and what's changing, so that you understand where opportunities may open up for you that bigger companies or other companies that are starting up won't see. So let's just talk about the value chain. It's a basic concept, and it of course reflects the fact that nobody builds the whole thing. And the modern IT industry is really a story about disintegration, about more niches open up, more companies are established that fill places where they are specializing in doing just one step along the way. But in some sense, you have an IT industry which is built on top of silicon and baseline software. There are suppliers into that. After all, Intel and NVIDIA don't do everything themselves. They buy a lot of hardware development tools. They often buy significant amounts of chip intellectual property design, pre-designed components that they incorporate into their chip designs. And similarly, on the software side, there are key building block software that leads to large software platforms, which are also key ingredients into the development of systems in that purple row. But then you have all kinds of things that are built on top of those systems, as we have seen more and more development of rich software ecosystems. So sometimes it's very generic. Think about AWS. We'll just rent you a computer that has very little market orientation at that level. They established a new layer in the value chain. And then ultimately you have a set of people who are providing the end services. Netflix is an end service. Google is often an end service. Airbnb is an end service from an IT perspective. And that goes to some combination of business consumers and private consumers. Business and private consumers are pretty different in their needs, what they're able to pay, in the numbers. And so you really have a pretty sharp separation, a partitioning of the market between private consumers who are buying out of their paychecks and business consumers that are building something in some market for somebody else, Ultimately, everything goes to a private consumer, but it can be extremely indirect and can go through many, many layers before it gets there. This distinction between existing and emerging markets is important. The key thing to start with is that existing markets are big and emerging markets are small by definition. Existing markets are relatively well understood. They're relatively slower growing. They are relatively richly endowed with products, competitors, customers who understand what's available, defined pricing models, commonly assumed trajectories about how things go. You don't know exactly what is going to go into the next iPhone, but you know pretty exactly when it's going to be launched and what it's going to be called, because we're up to, iPhone 17 at this point. That's an existing market. There's lots of pre-existing infrastructure and expectation. And you can play in that market, but it requires understanding exactly what is there and how you can wedge into an existing market with a new good or service. Emerging markets are small. They're often triggered by some market restructuring, some new technology comes along. And certainly there's a tremendous amount of churn and upheaval that's coming from the appearance of AI. It's a new technology which is triggering many, many shifts. They're initially small, and that sounds like a bad thing, but it's really a good thing. Small markets are generally not that attractive to established players. They look at a market and they say, oh my gosh, that's only going to be a $10 million market in the next 2 years. Why would I bother when there's lots I can gain by just incrementally growing my customer base? I can easily get $10 million for the same level of effort by expanding in an existing market. That makes sense if you're big, much harder to do if you're small. If you're small, you look at that opportunity and say, $10 million, that's enormous. That's a huge, attractive stepping stone towards success. It's also a place in emerging markets where it's much easier to establish new business models, where you can say, it may be a product that looks a little bit like what exists in some adjacent space, but the fact that I'm now selling you the intellectual property for it instead of building it for you, or I'm renting it to you instead of selling it to you, or I'm selling it to you instead of renting it to you, are all things that may make it make sense. Am I renting it to you by the second, the minute, the hour, the day, or the year? Well, if you were renting cars by the year, you call it a lease. If you rent it by the day, you call that Hertz or Avis or Alamo. If you rent it by the minute, you call that Uber. And I don't know about renting cars by the second, but if you can figure out a reasonable way to do it, there's probably a good business opportunity. It's also something where you want something that has the potential to grow very big, often because the underlying trigger from market restructuring or technology is such a huge effect on the market that the market opening may be initially small, but it will continue to open and open and open, and you want to be there from the beginning. It's also an opportunity to set the nomenclature, to start calling it something, with the ultimate goal of becoming a verb. Oh, how did you get here? Oh, I Ubered here, or I Googled it, whatever it is.